All right, this is Rosa Parks, my story. We're going to be reading pages 31 and 35. 30. All right, so we're looking and we're paying attention. How It All Started by Rosa Parks with Jim Haskins. One of my earliest memories of childhood is hearing my family talk about the remarkable times that a white man treated me like a regular little girl, not a little black girl. That was right after World War I, around 1919. I was 5 or 6 years old. Moses Hudson, the owner of the plantation next to our land in Pine Level, Alabama, came out from the city of Montgomery to visit and stopped by the house. Moses Hudson had his son-in-law with him, a soldier from the north. They stopped in to visit my family. We Southerners called all Northerners Yankees in those days. The Yankee soldier patted me on the head and said that I was such a cute little girl. Later that evening, my family talked about how the Yankee soldier had treated me like I was just another little girl, not a little black girl. In those days in the South, white people didn't treat little black children the same way as little white children. And Moses Hudson was very uncommon about the way that the Yankee soldier treated me. Grandfather said he saw old Moses Hudson's face turn red as coal of fire. Grandfather laughed and laughed. All right, so now we're going to be in the part of the story that's entitled Not Just Another Little Girl. I was about 6 when I started school. Sylvester started a year later, when he was around 5. We went to the one-teacher black school in Pine Level, in a little frame schoolhouse that was just a short distance from where we lived. It was near our church in Mount Zion AME Church, right in the churchyard. In many places, the church had used as a school, but in Pine Level, a schoolhouse on the church grounds. We had first grade through sixth grade, and there were about 50 to 60 children in one room. We sat in separate rows by age, and at certain times the larger students would go up to read or recite, and then at other times it was the smaller ones' turns. My first teacher was Miss Sally Hill. She was very nice. I remember she was a light brown skinned lady and she had really large eyes. When the children would tease me or say something about how small I would start crying. And I would go up and sit with her, and sometimes she would call me up and talk with me. I was already reading when I started school. My mother taught me at home. She was really my first teacher. I don't remember when I first started reading, but I must have been 3 or 4. I was very fond of books, and I liked to read and I liked to count. I thought that I would be able to take a book and sit down and read, or what I thought was reading. Any book I found where I couldn't read the words, I made up a story about it and talked about the pictures. At school, I liked fairy tales and Mother Goose rhymes. I remember trying to find Little Red Riding Hood because someone had said it was a nice book to read. No matter what Miss Hill gave me to read, I would sit down and read the whole book, not just a page or two. And then I would tell her I finished this book. Then I started learning to write, making my letters. I had Miss Hill for only a year. Then I had Miss Beulah McMillan was our teacher. We called her Miss Beulah. She had been a teacher for a long time and had taught my mother when she was a girl. My mother had a picture of this same little school with the students in front of the schoolhouse on the steps, in rows, on the steps, and down on the ground. The shorter ones and the boys were on their knees on the ground. My mother never wanted to show me to anybody, show me to, wait, 1 second. My mother never wanted to show it to anybody because it was a real battered up old picture. But I liked it. I used to take my magnifying glass and look at the faces, which were very small. Miss Beulah and I liked school. We had fun there. At recess, the girls would play what we called ring games, like little Sally Walker sitting in a saucer. Rise, Sally, rise, and ring around the roses. The boys would play ball. I didn't think the girls played much ball at school. We used to play at home a little bit. My mother would buy us a ball, and we'd have to be very careful because pretty soon the rubber ball would be lost. It didn't last too long. We called what we played basketball. It wasn't too I wasn't too active in it because if I tried to be active, I'd fall down and get hurt. I wasn't very good when it came to running sports. She may have been clumsy. Some of the older boys in school were very good at running sports and playing ball. They were also the ones who were responsible for wood at the school. The larger boys would go out and cut the wood and bring it in. Sometimes a parent would load a wagon up and bring some wood and bring it to the school, and the boys would unload the wagon and bring the wood inside. They didn't have to do this at the white school. The town or county took care of the heating at the white school. I remember that when I was very young, they built a new school for the white children not very far from where we lived. And of course, we had to pass by it. It was a nice brick building and still stands there today. I found out later that it was built with public money, including taxes paid by both whites and blacks. Black people had to build and heat their own schools without the help of town or county or state. Public money is the money that is used by the government. It's called public money because it is supplied by the public, like for your taxes and everything. Another difference between our school and the white school was that we went only 5 months while 9 months. Many of the black children, I just went blank. Okay. Many of the black children were needed by their families to plow and plant in the spring and harvest in the fall. Their families were sharecroppers, like my grandparents' neighbors. Sharecroppers worked their own land owned by plantation owners, and they got to keep a portion of the crops they grew. The rest they had to give to the owner of the plantation. So they needed their children to help. At the time I started school, we only went from late fall to early spring. I was aware of the big difference between blacks and whites by the time I started school. I heard my grandfather's story about how badly he was treated by his white overseer when he was a boy. My mother told me stories about old people had told her about slavery times. I remember she told me that the slaves had to fool the white people into thinking that they were. The white people would get angry if they saw slaves acting unhappy. They would also treat the slaves better if they thought the slaves liked white people. When the white people died, their slaves would have to pretend to be very sorry. That means they had to be like they were sorry that the person died. Do this right in front of the little slave children, and then the children would do the same thing in the presence of the grieving white people. I was glad I did not live in slavery times, but I knew that the conditions of the life of my family and me were in some ways not much better than during slavery. I realized that we went to different schools than the white children, and that the school we went to was not as good as theirs. Ours didn't have any glass windows, but instead we had little wooden shutters. The windows had glass panes. Some of the white children rode a school bus. There were no school buses for black children. I remember when we had to walk to school, sometimes the bus carrying the white children would come by, and the white children would throw trash out the window at us. After a while, we would see the white school bus coming. We would just get off the road and walk in the fields a little distant from the road. We didn't have any of what they call civil rights back then. So there was no way to protest and nobody to protest to. It was just a matter of survival and getting off the road so we would exist from day to day. Now, civil rights are rights that are given to you by the Constitution, and they're basically rights that we all have. They're called civil rights. Now, that is your story, pages 31 through 35. So now what we're going to do is we're going to do the Unit 1A, finding evidence and activity sheet.